one
No
other
problem.
thing. It is Zoom. It is a radio show then mainly, and that's why we'll go in and out of commercials, and that's when music will play, going in and out of commercials.
I got that. Yeah.
But when
Okay.
we're in commercials, even if it's even a minute, we stay on Zoom, and that is seen on YouTube and so on. So just so you'll know, you're
You
never
still
off
get, you
camera.
still got sound and everything else like
Yeah,
that.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, I know how it works.
Okay.
we got it all.
He's
We
had his
got it
own
all.
radio shows. He knows what's going
Oh,
on.
Christ, 15 years.
Awesome.
Very cool. Okay, well, if we are ready, then I will start the audio. The video has been recording, and
Are you bringing it in, Kat, or am I?
No, you're bringing it in.
Okay,
All right,
sorry.
stand by.
Hello, everyone. This is Mike Gormley sitting in for Jeremiah on the Jeremiah Show. Jeremiah is, he's either out wandering the streets of Santa Barbara or he's taking care of a sick friend. The second part, I think, is true. And we wish him well in helping his friend. Our guest today is beaming in from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And he is a highly revered music journalist in Canada, but also around the world. His name is Larry LeBlanc. And do you pronounce the C, Larry, or is it LeBlanc, like French?
Depends who's talking to me. If I'm in Quebec, I don't pronounce it.
Well, I tend to not pronounce it, but whatever you want.
Whatever you want.
Okay. And Larry has written for Billboard magazine. He's presently senior editor of
Celebrity Access.
yeah, I was going to say Celebrity Access, but somehow it sounded wrong in my head, but it's right, Celebrity Access.
I've been there 12 years and it still sounds wrong to me.
But has done many things over the years as even a PR guy, but mainly a journalist. And that's how I know him from many years of him writing about artists of all types and all levels of popularity, and sometimes very high levels of popularity. We actually have photos of him with Neil Young and Michael Bublé and other Canadian artists. Hi, Larry. Welcome.
Yeah, you and I have known each other from when you were in Detroit News.
Detroit Free Press.
And, yeah, Free Press, and then at Mercury.
Yeah, then Mercury Records. I remember you coming to Mercury Records, and you knew we were in the lobby of One IBM Plaza. We had not met. We talked. I don't know if we had met yet.
We talked. Yeah.
And I happened to be wearing a hockey sweater that was given to me by the members of Rush. And of course, my name was right on the back. So all of a sudden, way in the back, I hear Gormley. You had me pegged.
Well, I think you kept sending me New York Dolls records. So, I mean, that was part of the connection as well, too. But,
yes. And I don't know. Should I
Mercury
apologize for
was-
that now?
Yeah, but Mercury was great because we had, we broke out Rush and we broke out Bachman Turner Overdrive. You get, and you got to remember back then, a Canadian victory was getting from, 3 provinces over. If you made it over 3 provinces, that was a Canadian tour. I mean, you made it, and if you were in Vancouver and you made it over the mountains or south, that was a victory. Because basically back in those days, groups played around their own hometown mainly, right?
Right.
And in Toronto, I had Yorkville Village, so we had everything there. I mean, I saw, if you can imagine, Neil Young and Rick James in the same group, the Minor Birds. If you can imagine, they recorded for Motown at one point. But there was Joni Mitchell, there was the Sparrow that became Steppenwolf. I mean, I can go on and on. Buffy St. Marie, David Clayton Thomas, who went on to Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But for the most part, they only played within that area. And then if you went out to Vancouver, it was like the Collectors and people like that. And
Tommy Chong's band.
Tommy
Yeah,
Chong. Well, Tommy Chong was in the Vancouvers, Bobby Taylor in the Vancouvers. But what you also forget about Tommy Chong was he had his own nightclub.
Oh, really?
There was a great hangout place where we all went, Oil Can Harry's. And yes, it was as much in the Cheech and Chong tradition as you can, imagine. But in Vancouver, which is interesting, Loretta Lynn did her first records in Vancouver, and Jimi Hendrix was in the clubs back in those days. And I did an interview years ago with a couple of people, and I came across a video clip of Jimi Hendrix being interviewed by David Mulligan, who's a well-known DJ out there. And this is 67, and Jimmy Slidey goes, "So is Mrs. blah blah Haley still teaching at blah 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 school?" And Terry goes, "What?" He says, "Well, I went to kindergarten in grade 1 in Vancouver because his grandmother lived there. And when his mother died, his father, had to keep working. He shipped him off to Vancouver. So Jimmy played, first off, he went to school there, and then he was sent back to Seattle, and then he played in all the clubs there. Like he played with Bobby Taylor in the Vancouvers. He played with a bunch of those different bands.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
it's a small, but that's how Canada was at that point. And if you're in Vancouver, you were going north-south. If you're in Toronto, the biggest act I had growing up was a group called the Mandela with Dominic Triano. But they meant nothing outside the city. Montreal, JB and the Playboys. Up in Ottawa, the Staccatos, right? And they had one record that was across Canada. The goal was to get to the United States.
Yeah. And a lot of people did get to the United States, but some stayed. Gordon Lightfoot basically stayed in Canada, despite it being
Not
that.
quite true. He
I
kind
mean,
of went
I'm
both
not
ways.
saying he never came to the States, but
No. What he did though was he was very smart. He got management with Albert Grossman, where Ian and Sylvia already were. Odetta was, of course, Bob Dylan was. So he had that connection. He recorded. If you look at his records from that era, even though they were mostly Canadian records, they were Gross Court Productions, which was John Court and Albert Grossman. So he played down there. He just didn't get popular until, a few years later, in like 1970 would have been his breakout area. But, he had a couple, Early Morning Rain did their Bad Day, and July did, okay. There was a couple records there that did something. Ian and Sylvia had the first real breakout, with Four Strong Winds and Someday Soon and stuff like that. But they came back to Canada because they changed labels after Vanguard. Sylvia was pregnant with their first child, but they recorded in Nashville before almost any of the rock groups did. And what was really interesting was their producer in Nashville, and this is way before the Byrds got there and Dylan got there, but their producer was Todd Rundgren, which is kind of cool.
I didn't know that. That's funny. Great Speckled Bird, or was that before?
The Great Speckled Bird album on Apex, and that's why they were managed by Grossman. That's, if you notice, Todd Rundgren's early albums also were on Apex.
Mm-hmm. It's all connected. It's all connected.
Well, Canada's very small, even to this day.
Yeah,
we all know each other.
Now, what about the more recent Canadian breakouts? The Weeknd, Drake, artists like that are coming out, that are huge coming out. Is that camaraderie there?
No, actually, I don't think they had much to do with each other before. I heard a Weeknd when he was doing almost church music up in London, Ontario, and working with different and different people and stuff like that. He was working with a friend of mine, and Drake, of course, was in a TV show that we all grew up with, and was a TV star in Canada. And then he started doing the mixtapes and stuff like that, But he was in Degrassi High. If you were very careful, you would see him as a wheelchair playing Jimmy.
No, really, I didn't know that.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, I mean, the thing about Canada is interesting is you can juggle careers. I mean, I've written for TV, I've written for film, I've been on radio. Well, every artist, you scratch them. The same thing. Bryan Adams started his career off doing jingles. Most people did up here. You did jingles first. The newer ones are a little bit different because you have the access of the internet and different things like that now, as well. Weekend's interesting because I think his parents are Ethiopian and he came over here really, really early. And came basically working with some people out of Ottawa,
Mm.
you
That's
know.
that's interesting. Now, talking about coming out of Canada, the word is out now that Neil Young's moved back to Canada after all these years. Is living up in up near Peterborough, up that area north of Toronto.
I haven't heard of that. Omimi, because that's where he's from.
Yeah, he's supposed to have a place up there in the lakes. Oh, he's been up there for the pandemic with his wife.
Daryl, yes,
Yeah,
yes. I
Daryl.
don't know if they're
Daryl Hunt.
married yet, but yeah.
Oh no, they're married.
Oh, are they? Okay.
They're married, and
See,
supposedly.
you keep up in the celebrity stuff better than I do, Mike,
Right. Well, they're all call me. They call me all the time, and I can't
I
get
know,
away from it.
yeah. I saw him when he played up here in, he did a small concert for Omimi for the school or some kind of production up there like that. And that was really, really interesting. And as I said, I saw him years and years ago, and I got to interview him. I was doing somebody was doing a documentary on Randy Bachman, so he did that,
Mm-hmm.
and that was it. That was interesting.
What do you consider your first interview?
Ronnie Hawkins, 1965. In fact, I talked to him this week. He's still in good shape.
That's good. Ronnie Hawkins, for people who don't know, in Canada, he's actually from Arkansas, and he was a rockabilly star, and he had an amazing band that became the band.
The band,
but,
right. He had hits like Bobo Diddley and Who Do You Love? You ever listen to his recording of Who Do You Love? There's a 16-year-old guitar player who's kind of pretty good named Robbie Robertson. And he's copying Hubert Sumlin, that played with Howlin' Wolf.
Uh-huh.
And what I mean by copying, when you get that high sound, when you put your fingernail up, on underneath the string, and you make that high sound, and that became part of the Toronto sound. But you listen to Who Do You Love? Robbie's 16. So when we're growing up, everybody in Toronto wanted to be Robbie Robertson.
Everybody in Ottawa, my hometown, did too. I'd go see them whenever they got to town, and I'd ask how he got that sound, but they always had some funny answer as opposed to the rhythm. They always talked about banjo strings on his guitar or something like that. But here was a 16-year-old guy, and the rest of the band wasn't much older than him, except for Levon.
No.
Yeah.
And who did, and he used to be in a band called the Thumpers with Pete Trainer, who did Trainer amps. Everybody had a Trainer amp and Pete used to redo his guitars. His I don't know what his guitar was done at that period of time, but it was definitely modified. Mm-hmm. And the sound that Robbie had went from one guitar player after another. And went to Dominic Triano, for example, next, and went all the way down. And if you go and listen today to the television show Nashville, Colin Linden plays very much in that style. Daniel Lanois plays in that style. All going back to Robbie. Now they've modified and they've made it a little bit different from what they are. But that's what it was. That was the basis. Don't forget, nobody was making records here. Nobody made records here for years and years and years. They did a single or something like that. And back in those days, to record a single was $500. So you could do singles. Album? No, not until the Beatles started hitting with Sgt. Pepper and stuff like that. People started going, okay, well, maybe we should be doing some albums.
That's interesting. Now, we mentioned Bo Diddley, Who Do You Love, which was on the Roulette label. So yes. Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks were signed to an American label. And in fact, I believe that, what's his name at Roulette Records?
Morris Levy.
He said,
greatest songwriter of all time.
Oh my God. There's a couple of stories about that. One of which is he says Ronnie Hawkins broke his heart because he wanted to break Ronnie Hawkins big time. And Ronnie Hawkins was on American Bandstand and all these other shows for a while. But then he moved to Canada,
Yeah,
and
stayed here.
evidently
Yeah, I mean, and you know who brought him up here was
Conway Twitty.
Conway Twitty. Conway had written it doesn't, you know, that big hit record that he had was written up here.
Mhm.
And he said, "Hey, Ronnie, there's gold up there." Da, da, da. He took him to Hamilton. First night, Ronnie had 2, 3 people in the club. Next night, he had 4 or 5. By the end of the week, it was packed, and he never went back home.
No,
Morris Levy is an interesting character because, as you know, he was considered the Godfather. Hooked him with the mafia. My wife was worked for him out of England as his publisher.
really.
And there's a book out you should read by Tommy James, talking about, you know, his whole career, which was with Morris Levy. And Morris Levy went on to work with John Lennon, all kinds of things. But there's a famous thing in there when Moni Moni was recorded and sat there for 5 years. Okay, nobody heard the song, and it was on the Snap label. Nobody heard the song. 5 years later, some DJ starts playing it, and all of a sudden 8 record companies in New York are after this song. You know, they want to release Moni Moni. So he gets he gets a call from somebody, and he goes, welcome to my label. He says, no, you don't understand. I got all these people wanting my record. No, you don't understand, Tommy. You're on my label now.
That was it.
That was it.
Reportedly, the background is that he called all those other labels and said, "Back off."
Of course.
The other one about that is, and I don't even know if it's true, but it's a great story, is that when the Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks album came out, there were a couple of songs on there written by Robbie Robertson, and suddenly there was a co-writer, Morris Levy.
Yeah,
and Robbie knew nothing about
stuff.
Knew nothing about it. And when he got to New York, the Hawks played in New York, and he went around to Roulette Records and walked up and said to the secretary, "I want to talk to Morris Levy." And he's, you know, he's really upset about the fact that this guy has attached his name to the song. And the secretary announces him, the door is open, Robbie walks through, and Morris Levy's sitting at the desk. On each side of him are 2 tough looking guys, to put it lightly. And Robbie sees these guys, and Morris says, "What is it you want?" And Robbie said, "Just wondering when we're going to write together again."
Oh, the song I was thinking about wasn't Moni Moni, it was Hanky Panky. Moni was
Hanky Panky,
later.
right.
It was Hanky Panky that was on Snap Records.
Yeah.
And there's a funny scene in the book, which apparently they're making into a movie and Tommy arrives in New York for the first time, and he's sitting in the same lobby that you're talking about. And he's sitting with a real tough guy, a real, like an enforcer. In the back room, somebody is getting walloped. Somebody's really, like, you know, getting kicked and marked around. And the bouncer turns to Tommy and goes, "So Tommy, this your first time to New York?" I mean, it just epitomized that era. I saw things back in those days where I saw guys have their arms broken in bars.
Well, yeah.
I saw a scene in Ohio where the bar owner told the band to turn, you know, the music down. They didn't. He took a shotgun out and took out one of the speakers. That was done. Ronnie Hawkins used to have a guy that was deemed a mob enforcer around him. His name was Heavy Andrews, and he dressed in Colonel Saunders white. He was only about 5'1". And I remember going to a couple of my police friends and going, "Is he really?" "Oh yeah, he's connected. You know, he's connected." It's the same thing like years later when I worked for Record World, right? And above me was Alan Klein, right? With his whole operation. He managed, of course, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles and stuff like that. And I don't know if you ever come across a character called Pete Bennett. But Pete Bennett, okay, you know who I'm talking about. Pete Bennett was always in Billboard magazine with his arm around George Harrison, his arm around Elvis Presley, his arm around you name it. And he's the one that sent Alan Klein to jail, because Alan Klein, when they did the, you remember the big, George Harrison did the music for Cappuccino. Remember they did the whole thing? Well, a number of the albums that were actually pressed up didn't quite make it back to the charity. They were kind of went back to Alan Klein. And Bennett went in, but we'd see Bennett all the time downstairs at Record World. I was at Record World from 1970 to 80. And of course, that was an American music magazine trade. I had started writing in the States for Hit Parader, which was a guy called Jim Delahan. That was one, remember, they had all the words to the songs?
Yeah, I
Every
remember
song you
that.
wanted, it was there.
It was like a teen magazine, but it was.
I did What's Happening in Canada. I did the Kensington Market. I did the Guess Who. And I started going to the States at that time, meeting guys like Ren Cravette, meeting, publicists and different people that were Graylin Landon, who was Elvis's right arm at RCA. He only had one job at RCA, and that was pleasing the Colonel and pleasing Elvis. And I actually met Colonel Parker through him. We went out to see Elvis in Vegas, the Steve Binder film at Culver City. Big theater, right? Huge theater. And I'm with Rodney. I'm with all these different people. We're all out there, and in the foyer. And I'm not making this up. Like this place seats 3,000 people. There's 30 music critics in watching this movie. In the front, serving popcorn, was Colonel Tom Parker.
That's from his Barker days when he was.
Well,
with,
you can't
Carnival.
you can't make things up. Or I interviewed James Brown when I was like 14, 15, the night the lights went out in North America, or at least the East Coast. And I hitchhiked through Toronto, and I'm 14, 15 years old to meet him. Or your Big Mama Thornton. She played here at one of the clubs. No, she was here for a television show. And of course, she did the original Hound Dog, right? And of course, she, very tough woman, very tough. And we're sitting there at about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, trading stories back and forth.
Those things are cool. We're winding down a little bit going into the first commercial. But when you get back, I'd like to hear, like, what's the worst interview you ever encountered? And don't answer easy. Now. Talk.
Yep,
and
no, I got it.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Larry LeBlanc right after this. You're listening to The Jeremiah Show with Mike Gormley.
What music's playing?
The Guess Who, American Woman.
Oh, cool.
I'll bring us back, and I'll talk about. Do you want me to pick one of those to talk about for him?
What are you coming back in with?
It's coming back in with Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks. Who do you love? So do you want me to tease to that?
Yeah, just a little bit, and then we'll get back to the questions.
Okay. Welcome back to the Jeremiah Show. We have Mike Gormley here with special guest Larry LeBlanc. We went out to the Guess Who American Woman, and coming back, we just heard someone we were just talking about, Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks with Who Do You Love? Larry, tell us a little bit about, we were just talking about Ronnie Hawkins. Any special, you picked all the music for today's show, by the way. So you want to tell us a little story about that song?
No, I chose songs and Mike took what he wanted. That's the way it works.
Oh, that Mike.
Mike is the ultimate control freak here.
No, you Canadians are so nice.
Oh no, we're not. That's he hasn't met Bruce Allen.
You have
right.
We don't do nice.
We can introduce you to not nice Canadians.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll get to my question in a minute. But that Who Do You Love, backed with it's Bo Diddley / Who Do You Love.
Yeah.
And it was one session. They cut the tape in half and made the A side and the B side, from what I'm told. But that's kind of like, for a rocker, and maybe a rocker of a certain age, that's a Canadian anthem. That version of Bo Diddley, Who Do You Love, is.
He actually recorded 4 versions of it, and the first version I think he did for a small label, and then he did a version for Quality Records. He also cut Chuck Berry's record as 40 days, where the original record is 30 days. And he got sued, I think.
He did it. I've got it right here to my right-hand side. I could play it for you right now. He does 30 days, and then he recut it and sings it 40 days.
40 days, yeah.
Why
yeah.
did he do that? Do you know?
Somebody paid him money to cut a record. I mean, that's.
Okay.
I mean, you got to understand. Well, a lot of those records weren't cut up here; they were cut at the A&R studio in New York. But as I said, he did Bo Diddley here first. I can only tell you that every band in the 1960s up to 1978 did Bo Diddley.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every one of them did.
Absolutely.
And Ronnie had. I interviewed Ronnie, as I said, in the lobby of the Le Coq d'Or, which was the club back then, by the way. And what was interesting, I couldn't go in. I wasn't old enough to go in. And a couple of years later, but Ronnie, to see a Ronnie gig was, you know, the song the band do, "Life is a Carnival." That's what was going on at the time. Hey, buddy, do you want to buy a watch real cheap? I mean, you went into that club. There were hookers, businessmen, politicians, everybody and their brother. And Ronnie would get up and, you know, he'd walk around the club and talk to him. And his thing to me was, "I knew you when you were a teenage genius." I mean, he was always, and I talked to him this week and I said, on the third floor to Le Coq d'Or, he used to have a boxing ring. And he would box. I mean, he became, if you look at the last waltz, you see him do "Who Do You Love?" And you know, he's kind of the older, you know, person at that point, you know, the father figure in the music industry. But back then, I mean, he played those Arkansas clubs. I talked to him, Leon Russell, about Ronnie Hawkins. He went, "Oh my God," he said, "Nobody picked a fight with Ronnie, because Ronnie was a fighter."
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, he got a scholarship in swimming, and of course became great pals later with Bill Clinton. He actually played the Bill Clinton inauguration.
Yeah, he did.
And Clinton got up and played sax.
Yeah, it's funny.
Oh,
yeah. So before we got into that, I asked you, and maybe I should say your top 3 worst interviews, but at least the worst interview you've encountered.
Okay, I'll try and do them in order. Tanya Tucker turns up 2 hours late. She's about 15, 16 at this point. You know, she's had Delta Dawn, she's had this like that. And she's just monosyllable in many ways. And I finally put my finger on the tape recorder and I said, "Excuse me, am I boring you here?" And she brightened up and then she was fine. Okay. Right. Now the next one is somebody I interviewed a couple times, but I thought I could be a daily writer for a newspaper. And I found out I'm the worst daily newspaper writer in perhaps the world. I get the interview a series of different people, but Ella Fitzgerald. And I've been told by her publicist, okay, you call her, here's her house number, blah, 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 here's the time. And, you know, I call down and she doesn't know anything about the interview. And I'm 22, 23. I've spent like 5 days researching. I'm ready. I've got every record. You know, I actually later on did the show and wrote about it for the Toronto Star. But I'm sitting there going, "So when you were recording with Chick Webb in 1933, Miss Fitzgerald, I don't want to talk about that." SHA. I'm going, wow. And this is a sweet name. Now, I worked with her a couple of times because when I was at CBC Radio, I worked with Don Heron, who was on Charlie Farquharson character up here, but he was on Hee-Haw. And we interviewed her a couple of times. All she wanted to do was, okay, I'll do a couple of interviews. My soap opera start at 3:00. That's it. I'm through at 3. And she was very nice, but she wasn't a woman. Okay, so those are 2. Johnny Winter was a strange one because I really, really liked him, but he insisted that he lay in bed with a girl to do the interview. And I went, no. And she was doing things at the same time. And
You know, on that note, I think we should go to a commercial.
I have a thing to do.
I hope it ain't that thing.
No, I'm gonna wait till after the show. We're gonna go out with David Clayton Thomas and the Shays and their song "Boom Boom." And you have anything to say about that, Larry?
It was the original version. There's two versions, but there's a studio version, an album version, and there's a single version. And that's the reason I got into the business. And again, there's a guitar break in there from a guy called Freddie Keeler, whose son is in the business now, Jesse Keeler with Mastercraft. And From Above, 1967 and 76, pardon me, 79, pardon me. And that guitar break is a lot like Robbie Robertson. And he's only 16, again, only 16.
Sweet. That's the sweet spot with these guitars.
Yeah, after 16, they go downhill.
After that, it's all downhill. All right. Well, on that note, we'll be right back. You're listening to the Jeremiah Show. Special guest, Larry LeBlanc.
We doing okay, Richard?
Welcome back to the Jeremiah Show. We're here with Larry LeBlanc, veteran music journalist, former Canadian bureau chief of Billboard. I mean, the list is long. And we just heard BB King, "Don't Answer the Door," on our way back in. How do we feel about that song?
He was incredible throughout his whole career. I didn't see the early BB King. Every time he seemed to be in Toronto, I missed him. But I saw him at the Montreal Jazz Festival about 2 years before he passed away. And, he was really heavy set at that point. He sat in a chair and he had this band that just, kicked ass. I mean, they were incredible. I mean, he had like a 24-piece band. And nothing beats the power of a 24-piece band, just going in. But the Live at the Regal Theater, is there a better blues album than that? Because I don't know what there is. Maybe Sippy Wallace, at the Ann Arbor Jazz and Blues Festival, with Bonnie Raitt might be another one. But yeah, BB King also, with Bobby Bland, the live album too, which is really good on ABC. I mean, BB King, you just sit there and you listen to the simplicity of what he's playing. Like, look at the thing he did with you too, when Love Gets Back in Town. I mean, and they did that at the Sun Studio. His music was so simplistic, but so powerful, and you believed it. I mean, I never met him. I knew Muddy Waters well. Muddy Waters used to play Toronto all the time. He would, and in fact, one time he played here, he opened for Jeff Beck, and Jeff Beck just threw a hissy because he says, "I am not closing for Muddy Waters." And Muddy goes, "No, you go and play. We'll play first, Jeff. It's okay because we'll be back at the hotel by 9 o'clock and we can drink." He says, "You go ahead and play." And I was able to sit on Otis Spann's piano that night. This was at the Masonic Temple with Club 888, or what they called the Rock Pile at that point. And he would play the Colonial Tavern down, which is a blues club down. Well, it was everything, but they had mostly blues and jazz there. And you'd walk in, and again, it was on the same strip where Ronnie Hawkins played Le Coq d'Or. We had the Friars. We had about 12 dirty clubs down there. I mean, these were filthy clubs. You walked in, I mean, just your foot slid, when you came in. And Muddy would see me, and what would happen on a Saturday, they would play a matinee at 3 o'clock. So what happens is they would play from 3 to maybe 4:30, and then they were back on the stage at 7 o'clock at night. Now, in those days, like most of the bands in Canada did 5 45-minute sets or 5:30 sets at night. So Muddy would go, young son, come and sit with Muddy. And you'd go over and the band would be sitting there drinking 7 and 7s. And they go, "Well, you're going to go back?" "No, sit down. You have supper with us." That's the way it was back and forth.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Do you sometimes feel, maybe you're not conscious of a kind of a portal for Canadian talent, because you can get the word out internationally for Canadian talent? You mentioned a few newer up and coming artists.
Certainly when I was at Billboard, a whole slew. I mean, everything from Bare Naked Ladies to Sarah McLachlan to a lot of those people like that. Probably less so now at CelebrityAccess because my, what I write about is around the world, more than anything. But there's no question I am the first person, or among the first people called if somebody's interested in an artist. I will hear from England. I will hear from the United States. I will hear from all kinds of different people like that. One of the strangest ones I ever got was Steve Popovich was a friend of mine who ran Cleveland International Records. I'd worked with him at CBS, pardon me, and of course he went on to do Meatloaf and Bat Out of Hell, and I got the early White Test pressings I helped play. He called me one day about Raffi, the children's singer, and he was
Who's iconic in Canada.
Yeah.
well, iconic. I mean, Raffi was huge, and I had got Raffi to deal at A&M Records with Jerry LaCourse because my first wife was a school teacher, and everybody, and Raffi, of course, as you know, went on, but nobody would touch him in the States. Popovich wanted to sign him to Cleveland International, and he did sign by the Irish Rovers, by the way. He wasn't at a party. So anyway, he phones me, what about this Raffi? And he never took the step forward. But he did phone Jerry Moss at A&M Records and said, you really should be signing that, And of course, back in those days, I mean, I heard from A&M all the time. I heard from, you were there at one point, I heard from Jay Bohlberg. I mean, to go on that David Anderley, I mean, to go on that lot, was just so
The A&M
exciting.
lot is another whole show.
That's another story that we could do. I always stayed around the corner at the Roosevelt so I could go on the A&M. I still stay at the Roosevelt. I mean, I do Group W. I do a bunch of them. I've done even the YMCA if I have to, but I prefer the Roosevelt, even though it's an older, and they've cleaned it up and remodified it.
Yeah, they fixed it up.
But more importantly, it's around the corner from the A&M lot.
That's right. So we're looking at, what are we looking at, Kat? We're going out to another commercial, and that means we're going to get to hear some music.
Yeah, we're going out to our last break. So, and we talked a little bit about Gordon Lightfoot a minute ago. You mentioned him with Early Morning Rain, and that's what we're going to hear next. So we will be back after that. You're listening to The Jeremiah Show. Special guest, Larry LeBlanc.
Cool. Wow, the last break. Maybe we're done. Oh my God.
We are
We could have done
cruising.
2 hours.
I know. I'm loving all the stories.
Oh, good. I'm starting to feel like the old person in the room.
No, I
know.
love it. I love it.
I want to ask you, I want to go back to some Canadian artists who stayed in Canada, if you don't mind.
No.
And just touch on maybe why they chose to or didn't have a choice. We'll see.
Well, I think the big thing there was
Well, wait a second. Hang on.
Let me call you guys back in, and then we'll get this on the air. Welcome back to the Jeremiah Show. You just heard Fingertips Part 2, Little Stevie Wonder.
Is that just a favorite, or is there a Canadian connection that I've never heard
no
of?
Canadian connection. Well, all the Motown acts were in Toronto early on in their career. Like I remember this is gonna sound real funny to you. The Supremes playing the Blue Note on a club in Toronto on Yonge Street, and me taking Diane and I think Flo, I think it was all three of them in the end, bowling next door because it was a bowling alley. I know it sounds funny, but that's what you did back then.
Yeah.
You know, Ry Cooder would come over to my house and we'd play Sun Records all night. Remember when Charlie released all the reissues?
Yeah.
They all played here. Martha Reeves lived in Toronto for a period of time. Ardeen Taylor, who wrote a lot of the hits and stuff like that, were here. Smokey would come up here. All the artists would play, and you'd get to know them. And back in those days, it was nothing to meet that. There were certain labels when I was young that you'd pick. Motown was one, Atlantic, Minute was another one out of New Orleans, Duke, Peacock out of Houston, because that was Bobby Bland and people like that. High Records, which had a whole series of different things like that. And of course, Motown was Motown. And I finally got to go into my editor at Billboard, Adam White's done this incredible coffee table book, if you can find it, on Motown Records. So 2 years ago, they were doing a reception for it in Detroit. So I said, I've never been to the studio, never.
Mm.
So we went down there and Adam was there and it was great. And he was my editor and he's done this book. And I had dealt with Motown for years, like Barney Ailes and people like that. And I met Berry Gordy as well. And anyways, we get down there and I'm sweating. I got to change. And the lady said, well, come on into one of the buildings. You can change in one of the buildings, because they own the whole buildings, like along one side and then on the back. They just don't own that one building. And we went into the producer's building. We went into another one. And then we got taken upstairs where we saw Barry's private quarters, which was kind of open, I think. And then the woman said, would you like, I said, oh, this is interesting. She said, can I stand in the studio where a lot of the stuff was recorded? And she said, well, we normally don't do it. So she took the rope back and I was able to go in and stand in the spot, where, but on the other hand, Motown farmed out a lot. You don't realize is a lot of the stuff was farmed out. A friend of mine, Harry Hine, took me to a studio called Pack 3, where they used a lot of the session stuff over there as well. In fact, Cool Jerk, which was the same musicians that played, on Cool Jerk, with the same Motown musicians. Mike, it was a garage. I mean, it literally was a garage in a suburban area. But
Amazing.
Detroit was close, so we all had that thing,
Yeah. Well, earlier we talked about Canadian artists who stayed in Canada, and it maybe damaged their career, or maybe they just for some reason couldn't get out of Canada. I mentioned Lightfoot, and you said, well, he did a lot of work in the States, but he was still based in Toronto.
Yeah, but after 1970, he was in the States all the time.
Yeah, he was. Nobody will know this name. Barely Canadians will know this name, but a guy named Bobby Curtola in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, I became real good. Well, he was released on different labels in the States, including a couple of LA labels.
Yeah.
I just don't think he was good enough. I mean, up here he had TV and Dick Clark Club, and I got to know him later. I was not a fan. He was he literally was one of the Bobbies of the Bobby. Well, Bobby V, yeah. I like, but I mean, it's like I don't have any great passion for, say, Frankie Avalon, okay, or
right.
Bobby Rydell. And he kind of falls within there. I saved my love for Fabian because he was so bad. He made great records. Freddie Cannon made great records. Bobby Curtola made a couple great records, but not really,
But he stayed in Canada, and he remained at least in Canada.
No, that's not true. Not true.
No?
He lived in Vegas for about 10 years.
Oh, well, let's see. There you go.
He played.
How about Tragically Hip? Tragically Hip.
Tragically Hip made a big.
Canada.
Well, Tragically Hip made a big mistake, and their manager had them sign with an American label. He signed with MCA, and there's a danger in that. What happened was they released the first record, and it's through MCA in the States. The A&R guy got fired. So you know the story. When the A&R gets fired, the band, any band that he had, is toast at that point. Mm-hmm. So they bounced around. They were at Atlantic for a while. They ended up on a bunch of different labels. I did an interview with the Gord Downey, who unfortunately died a couple years later, and that was like a national crying thing here. But Gord Downey and I were doing an interview for Billboard, and he said, we never really wanted to make it in the States. And we're sitting there going, because, well, Mike, to a degree, they were making up to $500,000 and $600,000 a night up here. So it's like, like the Bare Naked Ladies thing. okay, do you want to go down and play for 99X down in Atlanta? And by the way, if you do a couple of these tours, you're going to go down there and you're going to lose $20,000 or $30,000 on the tour, because the dirty secret in America is you play all those radio shows, you know, when you're trying to break through. You play, if they're doing a thing for fans, you play it. If you're doing a July 4th thing, you play for free. They don't even pick up expenses. So the tragically hip said, we don't want to do that. So anyways, he said that. We never wanted to make it. I said, Gord, who do you think you're talking to? I said, I'm not stupid. You sign with an American label. So anyways, his manager at that time was Jake Gold. He called me later and I said, how was it? And he said, well, and Gord and I got really, really pretty exasperated with each other. It was a pretty big fight with us. And he said, well, Gord said, I opened the door and Larry walked in. So, I mean, but basically they should have, and then their albums, I think kind of petered off. They did an album live at Cobo Hall that is, to my mind, absolutely incredible. And then, but if you go back to some of the early stuff, like New Orleans is Sinking and stuff like that, they were an incredible band. Then it got to the point where it was too late to go down there. Mike, if you're sitting there and you got a family, 2 or 3 kids, and you're going to go out on the road for 6 or 8 months, not going to happen. No, and that's what happens with a lot of bands. Matthew, I mean, a whole slew of bands from Canada were like that.
Tragically Hip was, I mean, when you mentioned that Gord Downie passed away a couple of years ago, there was a concert, their final concert that took place in Kingston, Ontario, their hometown.
Prime Minister
But it was broadcast across Canada.
Yeah.
Not just on TV.
Everything.
As a matter of fact, I went to a bar here in Los Angeles that was owned by a Canadian, and that concert was piped in. That's how big they were. They were.
There's that, and there's also a film, because he was dying of cancer, and basically he had to relearn the songs and stuff like that. And somebody had done a film of sort of the company, the tour, or what was going on. That date, that concert you're talking about was in Kingston. I didn't go down because I didn't want to intrude on what would be a very private moment. And but we watched it on TV in the house on the widescreen. I would say I don't know what the highest rating TV show in Canada would be. Probably one of the Olympic hockey things or something like that, but certainly that concert would be up there. And I wouldn't be surprised. I would say the numbers would probably be 20 million for that show. Probably. I'm only guessing, but it was right off the Richter scale. 20 million,
so people understand, the Canadian population is about 37 million.
Yeah.
So 20 million of those watching it. That's
back in the day when we were growing up, we used to only have 2 channels, CTV and CBC. And when there was a Montreal-Toronto hockey game, there was no crime in the 1950s, no crime in the 60s, because everything was off the street. Well, when they did the Tragically Hip thing, people were crying. I was crying. We were all crying.
Oh, I didn't even know that much about. I knew something about them because I had met them. They played the Whiskey A Go-Go, and Jake had me to come down because they were thinking about having Danny Elfman produce their album.
Yeah,
which Danny was not interested in doing because he didn't want to be a producer. But that's why I got to see them at very early stages, and they were. But then I went to this bar, and the bar was jam packed. This is in the Valley in Los Angeles, because it's his last concert. That's how.
That's the problem up here too. Is, I mean, you can do big numbers here and play everything here, and then you have to get the interest of somebody in America or Britain, like. Katie Lang is a friend of our family, right? Anya, my wife, had to talk Dave Edmonds into producing her. He did not want to do it.
Wow, amazing.
And as it turned out, they didn't get along with Ben Mink, her right arm, fiddle player, But the thing about it is no matter how big you get, we have certain amount of producers here, but we don't have many. But you also, particularly under the old system, don't forget, was you had to get a record deal in the States. Okay. To do that, you have to do a tap dance. That's why a lot of Canadian rap and hip hop didn't make it for years, because it was Caribbean based. And it wasn't until basically, I mean, the big record up here was, remember Snow? I mean, remember
Yeah.
Maestro Fresh West, Let Your Backbone Slide, which every rapper up here, that's what it goes back to. But they never got, everybody else in the States, when you went with a Canadian rapper, they went, yeah, no, Dream Warriors, no, not quite ready for us. Even Bryan Adams is still seen as the junior Springsteen in the States.
Yeah. Well, and the Dream Warriors, you mentioned them briefly. I hadn't even thought of them. What a great group that was.
Boombastic, yeah. Speck, I'm still dealing with Speck in the group. He's now in Dubai, working for a bunch of different record companies and people like that over there. I mean, the thing that's interesting is, and I make the argument with people that are still working today. Bruce Allen, I talked about the other day, he's 76. And he says, well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to retire. And I said, well, I'm 73. I'm not going to retire. We're circus people. We're circus people. Yeah. I mean, I had the busiest year this year I've ever had. I got
Bruce
5
Allen, by the way, people who are listening, Bruce Allen was the manager of back when Turner Overdrive in the 70s, but is the manager of Bryan Adams and Michael Bublé at this point.
Yeah.
And he's doing fine with those two artists. So he's a force. We tried to get him on the show once. He says he doesn't do podcasts. And then about 2 weeks later, he was on Lefsett's podcast. So I still have to bust him for that.
Well, he's a big fan of Lefsett's.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to ask something about up and comers in Canada, and I know that in your column, Celebrity Access, it's really music business and business people you're talking about. But what's coming up? I've heard of something called, is it ISKW or?
Mike, I'm the worst to ask about new Canadian talent because I don't cover it anymore, to be honest with you.
So that nobody you're hearing about that's coming up.
There's a girl that I really, really like called Posey, who won one of the contests here about 2-3 years ago. And then she was signed to one of the labels down in Nashville. And she's working with Steve Lipson right now, and it's Poesy. She's the best thing I've heard in 5 years.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I just don't hear. I don't hear as much. At one point, I used to have the demos of everybody. I mean, I got Bryan Adams's demos here. I got Alanis Miles's demos here. Alanis Morissette demos here. Everybody. But I've been out of Billboard for 12 years. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I did Billboard for 17 years as the bureau head. And I mean, I knew more about Canadian copyright than almost anybody in the country. And I still get things, and you know, I follow people. I mean, on country, I'm absolutely in love with Dallas Smith, who's had something like 12 #1 records in Canada, and nobody knows who the hell he is in the States.
Amazing.
But also my wife represents him too. So I mean,
you know him.
Yeah.
Larry's wife comes from England originally and worked closely with David Bowie, right?
She was with Bowie for 6 years, McCartney for 6. She broke T-Rex's Ride a White Swan at radio over there. Mm-hmm. And we heard from David right up to the end of his life. I mean, I'd pick up the phone and go, "Hello, Larry, this is David. Is Anya around?" Like, you know, even without going through Coco, he would phone direct. So I would go, and Anya would go down and see him. And I interviewed him at one point, and he didn't, at that point, he didn't know I was married to Anya. And I said, "Oh yeah." And then he went down to see Anya. So we went out a couple of times, and he would see me. We took my daughter, Robin, to see him one time. And he goes, "Oh yes, here comes the husband." He referred to me as the husband. And same thing, like Anya's best friend for years was Chrissy Hynde. I sat in a night, it was, you know, when she was married to Jim from Simple Minds, my wife and Anya going in like talking about like, like, and then Ray came in with a dress. What are you talking about? Ray Davies was in a dress. So you go through those kind of things. They're kind of funny what you come across sometimes.
Mm. Now, and talk about funny and kind of crazy, but I read a lot of your work a few years back or over the past few years about Palestinian music. What's that about? Where did that come from?
Well, what happened about 5 years ago? I was with Seymour Stein in Toronto, and there was somebody there from Jeremy Hulsh from Tel Aviv, which was a conference. And Seymour, you really should bring over Larry LeBlanc. He's a guy. So anyways, I got brought over to Tel Aviv for Tel Aviv, and got stuck in a boxcar out near the train station, interviewing a whole series of different people. Which, you do these conferences, you do Muse Expo, you do the Toronto, Canadian Music Week, and you do, the same thing with working in New York, the New Music Seminar and stuff like that. You get very good at these type of things. So I'm doing this. So what happened was Martin Goldschmidt, from Cook and Vinyl Records said, look, we're going down to Ramallah to meet 12 Palestinian musicians for lunch. You want to come down? I'm going, swim in the Red Sea with a bunch of other people, or go down to Ramallah. Let's go to Ramallah. And we meet them, and these are wonderful people. This has got nothing to do with politics whatsoever. This is just meeting people. And the thing that is happening down there is they just want to make music, Mike. They just, and the same thing with, I'm friends with a lot of Palestinian musicians. I'm working now with a friend of mine, Asif Ben Sharit, on a film that he's got called Prophets of Change, that Coldplay has put up the money for. Chris Martin and Coldplay, well, at least they helped provided the funding. And we just got Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction to be part of it. And we got the 2011 Nobel Peace Laureate, Leme, oh boy, I'm going to mess up her last name, Gobier. And they've agreed to do voiceovers for Prophets of Change. And what it is this is going to sound real strange to you. What has changed the world, and I've been to Vietnam, I've been to South Africa, but what has really changed the world is the fact that the music is available on the internet today. The first time I was there, we went down after we had this lunch, we went down through one of the camps. There's 8 of us going down the hill, and I'm doing karate things with the kids and fooling around. At the bottom of the hill is a 13-year-old kid who had a better iPhone, a better smartphone than any of the group that I was with. I was with like 6 top managers. And what happens today is they get the music from worldwide. Mm-hmm. And it's happening in Vietnam. It's happening in, all these different places like that. And whatever you think the music of Palestine is, you're wrong. Same thing with Israel. You're wrong. There is so much there that is incredible. And I found that in South Africa. When I went down there, I went to a festival that's crazy. This is like 2012, called Oppie Copy, right? It's 250 miles north of Johannesburg. And, you're expecting it's all going to be like Paul Simon with Graceland. Forget it. Heavy metal. Mm-hmm. They had hip hop and rap going to 5 o'clock in the morning. I would say about 1/4 of the groups that I've seen in Palestine have all been hip hop acts. Wow. There's a group there called Damn that you would love. And they do woman lib songs like, who am I? Am I the woman that you beat? Am I your best friend? Am I your mother? And they also got another song. It's kind of, and they're political to a sense of what they're doing. And they got a hilarious song I love called Mama, I'm in Love with a Jew. I mean, you have to hear it, and the thing about it is yes, they have views, and, I have views. I don't hold for for example, a boycott of music, for Israel. I don't agree with boycotts because it's funny. I sat with a young Palestinian musician that we brought over here, a gay musician, Bashir Makur, and 3 o'clock in the morning, we're getting him ready to do TV, and he was saying, I got a chance to, record with an Iceland group. And they're saying maybe I shouldn't do it. I said, well, what about Graceland? He goes, what's Graceland? We're talking about cultural boycott because nobody wanted Paul to go over there. I mean, they actually tried to stop him. So at 3:30 in the morning, I play him 3 tracks off of Graceland. His eyes just lit up.
Oh, amazing. That's great.
And that's the power of music.
It is. We're winding down now. I want to get one piece of information in, and you can react to it, or you can just say, okay. Larry, in Canada, the Juno Awards are the Grammys of Canada, and they're very important awards, and a lot of great artists have received Juno Awards. The only journalist who's ever received a Juno Awards is sitting with us here, is Larry LeBlanc.
Lifetime Achievement, the Walt Grealis Award, yeah.
Walt Grealis Special Achievement Award. And that's quite an honor. No other journalist has ever received that. And it's kind of late, but congratulations.
No, it wasn't late. It was actually marked 50 years. It's a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah.
So I'm kind
of. No,
cool.
I'm late in giving you congratulations, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I see. Late. Yeah, I kind of looked for your card. It never came in.
Sorry,
when I got it.
You didn't get the flowers.
No. It was funny. They treated us really well. We were in Regina, and it turned out it was also the year that Michael Bublé was hosting. And I've worked on 3 Michael Bublé albums, and I worked on a slew of Jan Arden albums for Bruce, who's another singer up here. So when Michael's hosting the Junos, I'm sitting there with Anya, and we're watching the show. Without telling the camera crew, he ran up to where we were, so we were on the national show too. When you give the award, they give it to you the night before, so you're able to get drunk really fast, But no, they do like one award on the Saturday. I was touched like that because I had started writing for RPM magazine when I was about 14 years old. And
RPM magazine was we're running out of time. Explaining RPM may take a while, but Walt Grealis, who was the editor and founder of RPM magazine, it was the only music magazine, Canadian, for a long time, and he blessed a lot of people who eventually went on to have great success.
Well, he started it to help his friend promote their own records. So
right.
There's different part of it. The thing about it was it was. There weren't many writers back then writing about, and in fact, over the years, Mike, there have never been a lot. It's only within about the last 5 years. I did 2 albums, as you know, Oh, What a Feeling, with 40 tracks of Canadian music, and each one of first, it was the second time that it had been done. There was one called Made in Canada, okay? And the biggest thing out of that was people going, I didn't know they were Canadian. Now, out of that has, and I'm not saying it led to everything, but today there are so many people writing books about Canada. There's about 10 books that have come out about Canadian music. None of that was being done before.
You've done some wonderful things. We are out of time, I think, officially. Are we not, Kat? What are we looking at?
Yeah, I think we're ready to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we're gonna have you come back on because I feel like there are 10 times more stories, and I want to hear them all.
A lot more stories.
So please come back.
What a jackass John Mayall was. I threw him out. I tried to throw him out of the radio booth when I was interviewing him.
Yeah, you're gonna have to save.
I tried to throw Gordon Lightfoot off a TV show once, and he was a good friend of mine at the time. So, it happened.
Yeah, he still talks about that, by the
Yeah.
Those Canadians can get a little mean, I hear.
Oh,
yeah, it can happen.
To wrap it up and bring it full circle.
Last comment. I used to play hockey with Margaret Atwood. Sharp elbows. That's all I'm going to say.
Margaret Atwood played hockey.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
I'm jealous.
We used to play a celebrity thing, and this woman had sharp elbows. That's all I'm going to say.
That's a good point to head out on. Thanks
Yeah,
so
that's
much for
perfect.
being here, Larry.
Thank you. We're going to take it out and in a perfect way with Canadian duo Ian and Sylvia. And Larry, thanks so much for coming on. Everyone have a great week. Communicate, listen more, and evolve. Thanks, guys.